Well, I sort of like old computers. So I've been collecting a few because they're kind of cool. So I figured I'd show you a few of them in my garage. Most important sign there. So let's take a look at these old computers. Vintage, you might say, much like me. So they're kind of lined down the wall here. I'll start off with, oh, there, look. It's an IMSA 8080, a really classic machine. This particular one is in really good condition, almost mint condition, almost exactly as it was purchased in 1976. It has the original IMSA 8080 MPU card and the IMSA RAM card and the SIO card and a Micropolis floppy disk controller. It also has a keyboard, which are not super common to see these around. And it works great. I did take it apart and replace the capacitors in the power supply and clean up some flux a little bit to make sure that it was all good to go. But it's a great working IMSA 88 connected to a little Wise 50 terminal. And then I have a second IMSA 8080, and this one's a little more used. And as you might see, for someone who bought one to use it, it has an aftermarket Cromemco Z80 CPU card and a 64K SRAM and a floppy disk, actually a hard disk controller card, which I haven't really configured yet. But the floppy disk controller is connected to a pair of 8-inch Stuttgart 802 floppy drives, which are great double-sided 8-inch floppy drives, all connected to a TeleVideo 914, which is a great old-school terminal. Then we have the Osborne, kind of the early luggable. It's a neat little screen here, actually quite readable, surprisingly. Z80, CPM, pair of floppy drives, and it works well. Next, we have another sort of competitor in that space of some of the early luggable Z80 machines. This is a K-Pro 1, which actually was later than some of the other K-Pros. The numbering's a little weird. But, Z80 CPM, nice setup, kind of an interesting metal form case. But it works well. Next, we have some of the PC lineup. Let's see, the first one here, this is an IBM AT. This is like the early Rev 1 motherboard, 6 megahertz 286, 1.2 megabyte floppy drive, probably not the original, and then a 360 floppy, which is definitely not original. But it's a well-working example of the IBM AT, which came out in 83 or 84, I think. Next up, we have a somewhat unusual machine, one you don't see a ton of, and it looks like a normal IBM XT, but it's actually an IBM XT3270, which was a variant of the XT that was sold to allow you to connect to mainframes. And it's actually an XT chassis, and the motherboard is a standard XT motherboard, but it had 3 additional cards that allowed you to connect to an IBM mainframe and a video card, kind of a cool ISA port video card that could do all of the 3270 emulation and do both monochrome or CGA output. It also has a special little adapter that allows you to use the IBM Battleship keyboard with all the 3270 functions mapped, so you can do all kinds of cool mainframe stuff. This next one is actually another somewhat unusual of this particular series. This is an IBM XT 286, which a lot of people don't know about, actually. It came out actually after the AT, so I think this came out in 86. And it's an XT chassis with a motherboard that was redone with a 286 on it, so 6 megahertz 286. It's actually a tad bit faster than the AT because it's 0 wait state memory. They didn't sell a whole lot of these because at the time, I think shortly after that, the AT came out with an 8 megahertz variant. But it's kind of cool. You don't see a lot of these around, though. You see a lot more of the original PC and XTs. And of course, next to it, we have an original XT. So this is an IBM XT 5160. It actually has the original hard drive in it, which surprisingly still works. This has the IBM 5151 monochrome display, which is a cool display because it has that really slow decay phosphorus. That was kind of reminiscent of that era, but a great working example of an XT. Oh, let's see, next up, the Model 1. Great machine. The Model 1 originally came just as this piece here, and then you could buy the expansion interface, which gave you 32K of additional memory for a total of 48K. And most importantly, the expansion interface had the floppy drive controller, so you could read and write floppies, which really expanded the machine a lot. So it's a great machine, Z80, 1.77 megahertz. And we'll come back to this one because I'm in the middle of doing a kind of a cool project around that. Next, Commodore PET. This is an 8032, which is kind of later generation of the PET and really kind of meant more for business, but still a neat machine. It's kind of cool that it lifts up like a car. And there's even a little metal prop there to hold this up so you can work on it, with the monitor on the top and the main board on the bottom. So kind of a neat machine. Next, IBM PS1. You don't see very many of these either because they didn't sell too well. It was kind of meant as a successor to the PC Junior. The one sort of interesting thing is that it has DOS 4.01 in ROM. So when you power it on, it boots DOS from ROM, which was kind of unusual for machines at the time. Next, Apple IIgs. This is kind of the bridge over between the Apple II world and the upcoming Macintosh world. So great machine. It allows you to use the ADB keyboards. And actually, the WAS edition was actually very common. There are lots of these around, even though they say limited edition. They made a lot of them. Next up, Apple II. This is actually an Apple II FX, which is when the FX came out, was the fastest machine they had available. It was just wicked fast. It's 40 megahertz, 6830. You could put 128 megabytes of RAM, which at the time was incredible. I think fully decked out, this machine was something like $20,000 if it was fully loaded. Just a fantastic machine, super fast, really cool platform. Next, LC3, yeah, not much to say about that. They're kind of dime a dozen. The blue machine here is actually really cool. It's it's an SE30, so a 68030, which was the fastest of the black and white Macintosh in this form factor. It's kind of the pinnacle, just a fantastic machine. I think it's a 15.8 megahertz 68030. This SE30 and these were available at the same time. I think the SE30 came out first though, but a pretty good amount of power given the really small compact form factor. The next one here, that's just a Macintosh. That's a 512K, so the Fat Mac, but one of the early Macintoshes. So a great machine, black and white screen, still works great. Let's see, what is this? Oh, Next. A couple Next stations. I wish I had a Next Cube, which is what the cool kids have, but I don't have one right now. But the Next station still works great. You know, it's a great way to play around with Next OS for sure. Apple IIc, such a cool machine with a little handle on the back. You can carry it around. Really neat form factor. Kind of like a pioneer in pushing a new form factor. A little tiny display that came with it as well. Just kind of a neat revolution from the Apple II. Next to that, oh look, an Apple IIe. These are like everywhere. Like almost every school had some of these, and everyone played Oregon Trail and died of dysentery. Nice MDEC Amber monitor, which I really like a lot. And these Apple IIs are really easy to find. They're all over eBay and Marketplace. And they're easy to keep running. They're easy to run. Lots of floppy disks available for them. So it's a great platform. Next, we have the TeleVideo 1605, which is a machine most people don't know. I personally like it a lot because this was the first computer that my parents purchased that was a PC-based computer. And so it was my first intro to sort of the PC world. It was an early PC clone. It actually was a pretty good clone. It could run Flight Simulator, Lotus 123, a lot of the sort of early apps. Kind of an interesting integrated chassis. The one we had actually had just two floppies. And it has a monochrome monitor. This one does, and a lot of them did. But it had a CGA video adapter that would output monochrome, so you could still play a lot of the games and stuff. It would just be in grayscale. Next up, the Model 4, the pinnacle of the awesome TRS-80 series. This is a really nice one my friend Jay had restored and kindly sold to me. 120K of RAM. This has the free HD, which is this really cool adapter board in there that emulates both the floppy and the hard drive and gets it all from an SD card, so you can pretty much have every Model 3 and Model 4 program ever written on that. Next up, the Commodore 64. I mean, sort of the pinnacle of my era of computing. Everybody has one and used one. They're really easily available now still, and a lot of great things you can do on them. We have a Model 3, so the precursor to the Model 4. We had a bunch of these when I was in middle school. It's one of the first computers I did a lot of cool playing around with. I had a friend of mine, Mark, who had one, and he was just a master at it. And they're really great machines. Great way to learn Z80 assembly language. In fact, there's a little ad for the Model 3 with Isaac Asimov on it. So let's see, what is this? Oh, a ZX Spectrum Plus, kind of a cool machine. Not something I've used much. They were popular in Europe. You didn't see them as much in the US. You did see these, though, in magazines. The Timex Sinclair, which is kind of a neat little Z80 computer that had a RF video output directly on it. The TI 99.4A. So this is the actual first computer that I ever really used, and it's the first computer I learned assembly language on. The TMS 9900, which was an odd processor, and the architecture of the TI 99.4A was even more bizarre. The way the video memory and the RAM was addressed was really weird, but it was still a great platform to learn how to do different things on and how to hack things. So many fond memories of the TI 99.4A. Atari 800, this I got recently from a friend of mine who no doubt played many games on it as a kid, so that's something I gotta turn on and play with a little bit. A color computer too. I have a color computer 1 in a box somewhere as well. I never had a color computer as a kid, but I had many friends who did. 6809, so a great machine to learn on, a relatively inexpensive way to get into computers. Atari 1040 ST, really nice version on the Atari platform. Kind of a fun machine, built-in 3.5-inch drive on the side, so a great example of some of the cool stuff that Atari did. And then a Commodore Amiga. This is an A1200, but I have a 500 here somewhere in a box. But just a great platform to show off all the great things Amiga can do with the graphics. So really cool machine. And that's sort of most of the vintage stuff. I do have maybe one more little rack of vintage stuff over here. I call this my Rack O Risk, because these machines are all from the sort of era of the RISC wars. So we have an HP 9000, one of the early PA RISCs, SparkStation 2. Gosh, when I was in college, I had access to a SparkStation 2 that was called Platypus. That was just fantastic. One of the fastest machines that I had access to. Spark 10, that would have been blazingly fast back then. A Sunfire Ultra Spark, of course, an SGI Indy with an MIPS R4000. Old Apollo 725, which is one of the very early PA RISCs. An IBM RS6000 with PowerPC. I think there's a 604 in that. An Alpha Station, which has, this one is a 200 megahertz, which has the 21064. So really cool Alpha. And then probably the newest machine on the rack is an HP that has the very last of the PA RISCs that they made. So nice little platform of PA RISC, and all these machines work and have the OSs installed on them. And then lastly, I have my sort of my workstation area where I work and build things. I mentioned about the Model 1. A friend of mine, Neil, and I have been working on a replacement motherboard for the Model 1. The idea being that will make the board, the final board, in the actual shape of the Model 1 board, and it'll fit in the case. So in this case, much faster, a lot more built-in I/O, all the memory will be able to emulate a lot of the stuff the expansion interface does, but still be fully compatible with a port there with the expansion interface, but also have VGA and composite output. And so hopefully the next revision, this stuff is working now, we'll do it in the actual form factor that will bolt right into the Model 1. And then lastly, just some solder station stuff for doing some micro soldering, and a little reflow oven back there for making things work. And that's about it for all my retro computing, at least for now. And I'll let you know if I get anything new.